Hi, I'm Bill Houghton, the founder of Sensible Surrogacy. And today we're taking a step back and we're looking at what exactly is surrogacy, what are the terms that you should know, and what are the different types of surrogacy. So if you've been reading about surrogacy in the media and you think that this is an option that might work for you, here we're going to talk about what exactly surrogacy is. And in short, surrogacy is an agreement where a woman, called a surrogate mother, carries a baby through 9 months of pregnancy with the intention that after the delivery, the baby will become the legal child of another couple, and that couple called the intended parents. Now, there's different types of surrogacy and some terms that you should know. Now, one of the first questions you're going to ask yourself when you go through the surrogacy journey, when you start your process, is are you going to do an independent surrogacy program or an agency program? Now, an independent surrogacy program means that you are basically handling this yourself. You're going out on your own, you're finding your own surrogate. You are going to work with her to go through the contract drafting process. You're going to make sure that she goes through her medical clearance, arrange for her psychiatric evaluation, all of her legal background checks. During the pregnancy, you'll be looking in on her and making sure she has whatever she needs, and she'll be calling you whenever something goes wrong or whenever she has a problem. You'll be arranging for the delivery, and then when the baby comes, you'll be arranging for the birth certificate and the transfer of parental rights from the surrogate to you if that's an issue, right? Independent surrogacy journeys are a good way of saving money because in a typical agency program, the agent basically does all of those tasks, all of those daily tasks. They go out and they find your surrogate, they manage her, they compensate her, they look in on her through every step of the process. The problem with an agency program is that although it is super straightforward and super easy, it's also expensive because an agency will typically, they will add about $15,000 to $25,000 to the cost of your program. So if you are the kind of person who is not so detail oriented and you don't want to have to go and manage your surrogate by yourself, then typically you would hire an agent to do that for you and you would pay them, like I said, $15,000, $25,000 for the fee. So under the broad definition of surrogacy, there are different types of surrogacy and some terms that you should know. The first is the difference between traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy. Now, traditional surrogacy is called traditional because it has been around for centuries, for actually thousands of years, and there are references in the Bible to traditional surrogacy arrangements where a woman became pregnant and then handed the baby over to a different couple, right? The important thing about traditional surrogacy is that the surrogate mother, the woman who is carrying the baby, is actually the genetic mother as well because we're using her eggs, and essentially she's just getting pregnant and giving the baby over to another couple, right? And for that reason, traditional surrogacy is just filled with all sorts of legal complications, and in most jurisdictions where surrogacy is regulated, traditional surrogacy is just banned, right? Because there are all sorts of legal questions about who is the legal and ethical mother of the baby. Compare that to gestational surrogacy. And gestational surrogacy is where the mother and the father, the intended mother and father, will donate eggs and sperm, where those will be combined in an IVF clinic to create embryos, and then the embryo will be transferred to the surrogate mother, right? Now, in this case, the surrogate mother has no genetic link to the baby whatsoever, and so when she delivers the baby and hands the baby over to the intended parents are not just the legal parents, but they're also the genetic parents as well. And this is the type of surrogacy that we talk about throughout the guide, throughout the video series. And this is really what you'll be considering as you go through your surrogacy journey. As you consider surrogacy programs worldwide, you'll be confronted with the difference between what we call altruistic surrogacy and commercial surrogacy. And quite simply, commercial surrogacy is available in a country that allows commercial activity surrounding the surrogacy process. Commercial activity can mean that you are paying your surrogate. It could mean that you're hiring an agent. It could mean that you are advertising for your surrogate in the local newspaper, right? All of those are commercial activities, and those are all available and permitted in jurisdictions where commercial surrogacy is allowed. Compare that to altruistic surrogacy. And altruistic surrogacy is supposed to be non-financially benefiting anybody, right? This is supposed to be just sort of a labor of love on the part of the surrogate mother to benefit the intended parents. Now, some people think that altruistic surrogacy means that the surrogate mother herself doesn't get paid, but that's not really true. She's allowed to get paid, but she's not supposed to be paid more than reasonable expenses. In short, it's not supposed to be something she does for financial gain. But those reasonable expenses can be significant. And in the UK, for example, and in Canada, where altruistic surrogacy laws prevail, right now, reasonable expenses can be anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 US. So when you're considering your surrogacy journey, you want to keep in mind the legal framework in the country or the state where the surrogacy is going to happen and where the baby is going to be born. And when looking at legal frameworks, there's basically three types. The first type are countries where there is legal framework, there's actually laws or legal precedent to support your surrogacy contract, but also allow for commercial surrogacy. Now, these are going to be the easiest countries to work in, but there's also only a very few of them worldwide. The most famous, of course, is the United States that supports commercial surrogacy contracts in most of the 50 states in the US. Also, Ukraine and Georgia fall into that camp. The second group of countries is going to be, the second group of legal frameworks is going to be countries where surrogacy is regulated. There are laws on the books, but those laws are restrictive, right? They put in specific restrictions, typically for altruistic surrogacy only. And these are countries like Canada, like the UK, like Greece, like Colombia, where surrogacy is possible and the surrogacy contract is valid, but only if it conforms to certain requirements by the government. The problem with altruistic surrogacy laws are typically that because there's restrictions on commercial activity, you can't go, for example, and advertise for your surrogate. You can't hire someone to compensate her and manage her throughout the process. So typically it becomes very difficult to find surrogates in these types of countries, and that's what we find in the UK and in Canada. In Canada right now, the wait for a surrogate is anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on the couple, and that's really because of the very stringent altruistic surrogacy laws. The same thing is in the UK, where finding a surrogate has become so difficult that really agencies don't even work in the UK anymore. The third type of legal framework is the one that you really want to avoid, and these are unregulated destinations, or countries where unregulated surrogacy is an option. And if you've been on Google, you've probably found options for surrogacy in Mexico, surrogacy in Kenya, surrogacy in Guatemala. And the problem with these destinations is that there is no legal framework whatsoever. There are no laws on the book. There's no legal precedent to support your surrogacy contract. The benefit of that is that anybody can go into surrogacy. The downside is that your surrogacy contract is really nothing more than a handshake between you and your surrogate mother, right? There is nothing enforcing the terms of your surrogacy contract. So she could break it at any time and do whatever she wants. You could sue her in civil court because you do have an agreement, but there's no criminal criminal offense in breaking a non-binding contract in a country like Mexico. The real issue, however, the real risk in an unregulated country is that surrogacy then becomes regulated by politics, right? If there's no law on the books, then surrogacy is treated according to sort of the political whims of the moment. And we saw this in Cambodia, we saw this in Thailand, we saw this in India, where one day surrogacy was considered a viable medical treatment for infertility. But following a sort of a media scandal, the country decided that they were going to redefine and reclassify how they treated surrogacy, and then suddenly surrogacy became a form of human trafficking. And because there was no law and no legal precedent, that became basically just a political decision that was made overnight. And what we saw in places like Thailand was that overnight, surrogates were suddenly criminalized and chaos ensued. So the real risk for unregulated countries is not necessarily that the surrogate is going to take parental rights and has an option to become the legal parent. The real risk is that there's a total uncertainty in exactly what tomorrow will bring in terms of, is surrogacy legal? Is surrogacy a criminal offense? Can you actually be fined or jailed for doing surrogacy? And without a legal framework, that's an unknown. So that is a quick definition of what surrogacy is and the terms that you should know as you plan out your journey. As always, if you have any questions, all of what I've just discussed in greater detail is available on the Surrogacy Guide at sensiblesurrogacy.com Surrogacy Guide. You can also reach us at info@sensiblesurrogacy.com and ask us any questions you may have, or arrange for a free consult with one of our consultants. There's also additional videos available on our YouTube channel. We have more videos coming out, including some webinars that you can look for in the future. And I hope to see you then.